Hello and welcome. So this and the following upload will be a small two-part series just to show what tuning is in Forza 7 from my point of view. In terms of what does it really affect, in the first part and then the second part will be me tuning a car and then going from there, see what we can get out of it. So let's get straight into it. Tyres. So right, here's one more general rules of thumb when it comes to tyre pressure and Forza. You can go about this in two ways. Firstly, being 27.5 all round for race tyres, then just drop off half PSI depending on the compound. So it would be, 27.5 for race, 28 for sport, 28.5 for street, and so on. Some cars actually like 30, even when on race compound. It's really dodgy, but you can put it to, or the other way is to have the tyre pressure once warmed up on the car whilst you're test driving and racing, is that it sits between 32.5 and 33. If you were to do this and whatever your starting number is, let's say it's 27.5, if it then reads 32, then you need to raise it by half PSI, which is one click, and then go the other way if it's too high. The gearbox. In lower powered cars, utilising a power band effectively, it could mean the difference between 2/10 or 2 seconds depending on how long the track is, obviously. And when a long final drive would increase the car's top speed and overall work put through each gear at the expense of acceleration. Having a short final drive increases the car's acceleration and maximises the use of the engine's power at the expense of the top speed. In general, you want the gears in such a way where the car is at peak torque after shifting and continues to gain horsepower through the use of the gear. That's not always true, because Forza has some weird ways sometimes in powers, but that's generally what we look for. This will become a lot more apparent when we actually apply this to the car though, so in the second part you'll get to see what we'll be looking at. Also, when tuning the gearbox, you want the best benchmarks that you can get, but sometimes this does not line up with a particular gear for a corner. For example, too low in the rev range, or too high that you create too much power and the car just runs out of revs too fast, or just wants to spin the tyres. On to alignment. So, camber. This is where essentially you tune into the car how much it can lean on that particular tyre. Front wheels will typically need or use more camber than the rears, although this is not always true either, depending on camber of the track or what drivetrain. In the video following this, I will show you how I tune the camber, which is using the telemetry option in-game, and drive around the track to see how the car starts with negative camber and goes to positive. Once I see what it is, like when it goes past 0, so positive, I would then take that number, add the 0.1 for safety, and then I would have my camber number. So if I was using negative 0.8 for example, I saw it go positive to like 0.1, I would actually add 0.6 and that would give me a camber value of negative 1.4 and so on. Toe. The main use for it is the stability of the car when the car is rotating, like the initial rotation, if it's too much or not enough. This being said, the toe should be more of a final option. At least it is when I do it. So whilst you're trying to get the car to behave, or behave in terms of it's oversteering into the corner, not turning enough for you, but you can go from there. You set the voltages to 0. That will give you a very good starting point, especially when you come back around to it after you think you finished tuning. You use that as like a fine tune. 0.1 is quite a lot. The caster, very simple, it's hard to explain, but the higher the caster, the more stable the car is at higher speed. It allows the car to turn harder, which is normally why I put this in a max, which is 7, and I pretty much leave it there. Very rarely does it come off 7. Anti-roll bars. In this section, this mainly affects how the car turns at mid to high speed corners, how it changes direction. Generally I put the stiffer roll bar where the engine is, but this is not always the case. The bigger the difference in the roll bar, the more unstable or stable feel you will create, in which some cars need. So if you got like quite a high front and quite a low rear, That's a lot of understeer you're putting into the chassis of the roll bar. So if it's front engine and rear wheel drive, good starting point is 25 and 15. You know, as I said, stiffer in the front, softer in the rear, and go from there. If the car still wants to understeer, then you would add more roll bar in front and lower the rear maybe. It's all circumstantial obviously, and then vice versa if it goes the opposite way. Just remember that it will be different for where the engine is and what drivetrain it is. Springs, this is pretty much the same ruling as roll bars. Same logic, you just want to more suspension where the engine is pretty much, and depending on weight distribution you can apply that there. Some people like to use calculations. I'll be honest, for my initial numbers I just put stiffer springs than what the car comes with and then go from there. Sometimes they go softer, sometimes they don't. Telemetry would, you know, help us out a lot there. The ride height also falls into this. Normally you want the ride height as low as possible, because obviously center of gravity. But tracks do have curbs and can bottom out. This ride height can be raised, obviously, but you don't want to unsettle the car completely, because you can throw braking, how the car actually handles, and from there. So just bear that in mind. So dampening. In this section, I personally find it hard to explain, so I'm going to go off the picture on screen. What you normally put is a stiffer rebound where the engine was, and then you go from there. Same with the suspension and roll bars, and then the opposite way around for the bump. The picture on your screen is basically what I do or go through once I've got some form of numbers on the screen. So let's say I put 10 and 9 and then 3 and 4 for, you know, rebound and then bumps. And then on here you can see, you know, too much US, which is understeer, OS is oversteer. And if the car's doing this in any of them, make those slight changes that is suggesting. See if it works, see if it doesn't. If it does, great. If it doesn't, probably means there's something wrong in some other part of the car. So aerodynamics. Generally, if you're using Forza Aero on your vehicles, it is best to go, you know, max front and start with like middle on the rear, depending on class of car, etc. You can look at the rear aero in a variety of ways. One being you have more speed or more grip at higher speeds, i.e. more braking and turning ability. Personally, I use it as a secondary roll bar, as long as the car has enough mechanical grip in the chassis and the tyres. Less aero, obviously less stable, more speed. More aero is more stability and better braking. In doing this, if you prefer the lower rear aero and the car gets a little too slippy but it feels good, you can just stiffen the corresponding roll bar, because they kind of go hand in hand. Brakes, these are pretty much completely preferential. I start with 40% bias and 100% brake pressure. I normally only move the bias if the car just seems to weight transfer too fast, and then kicks the rear when the diff cannot keep up but works for the rest of the track. So going into the diff, again going to use a rear wheel drive car as the example. The game will give you a diff setting of 70 and 35. This means there is plenty of room for movement. If I was to increase the XL, then I would inherently add more oversteer to the car upon accelerating, and lower will cause the car to be more stable. The detail is the complete opposite. Lowering the number, the more oversteer upon braking, the higher it is, the more stable. There may be a situation where the diff feels really good, but on the exit of the car, the inside wheel will spin like it has an open diff. This is going like back to the roll bar what I mentioned earlier. This just means that the rear anti-bar is just too stiff for the car. You can adjust it, just make sure when you do, something else could be affecting as well. So if you do get that inside one wheel, what's it called? One wheel peel. There we go. And you know, go from that. So what you would need to do is lower the rear anti-roll bar, and it should sort itself out. Just bear in mind that you might have to then adjust the aero as well. You know, it all goes hand in hand, all goes with each other. So, this will conclude the first part of the video. Next one will be out very soon. I'm gonna try and get it done tomorrow, next couple of days, and you'll get my view on how I will tune a car and how I go about it. Telemetry can play a big part, but I'm gonna try and do this, add some tips and tricks to the car that I see, and we'll go from there. It will be the TVR Sagaris, probably somewhere around mid S class. I'm just gonna put all the customizables on it and go from there. But thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.